Hello, George and Martha. Thanks for coming back in to meet with me today. As you know, we've been working for the last several months on reviewing your financial goals and determining where you are relative to those goals and getting together your retirement plan and your financial plan as well. So as I wanted to meet today to kind of talk about those goals and review where you are and what steps you need to take place to meet those goals. So ultimately, we'll start out with a few different topics, and then basically my plan is to just go over where you are in relation to those specific goals, and then outline a few steps as far as what to take in order to accomplish those goals. And then at the end, we can answer any questions and set forth some next steps as far as our next meeting and what steps to accomplish. So first of all, I'd like to just discuss your homeowner's insurance policy. There's certainly a need in this area to increase the coverage. You previously had identified a coverage amount of $3 million and a replacement value of $5 million. So ultimately, sort of the magical number we need there is at least 80% of replacement value. So as you can see, you're underinsured by about $1 million. So ultimately, if the replacement value is $5 million, you need to have an insurance coverage of at least $4 million. And that's the 80% figure where the co-insurance comes into play. The next insurance topic I'd like to discuss with you, which I think is a huge need for you, is a personal umbrella policy. This type of policy covers you for liability in excess of whatever other policies you may have in place. This type of policy is especially prevalent given your enormous wealth that you have amassed, and it also protects you in the event of someone claiming liability. And it goes on top of your existing automobile and homeowners insurance policies. Basically, it provides a catastrophic layer of liability in the event that someone claims you're liable of something. And ultimately, this type of policy typically has a $1 million value, and you can always add more for typically minimal or nominal expenses. And also, the other thing is it could also be incorporated into your watercraft coverage for your boat, so that could be certainly helpful as well there. Second thing that I'd like to discuss is George's 401k. He specifically asked us to outline some distribution options, and George, you mentioned that you were thinking about taking a lump sum distribution, which may not be the most suitable choice for you, specifically because if you do take a lump sum, there's a significant tax burden that is created at that point. So you asked us to explore some alternatives, one of which is you could simply roll the funds over into a rollover IRA, and then you can make investment decisions from that point. While that certainly is a great option, and you could certainly put together a diversified portfolio there, and certainly something we could help with, there are other options that might be beneficial for you. Specifically, there's an option called the net unrealized appreciation option. And what this allows you to do is take advantage of the basis that you have in the stock and pay taxes in a two-step method. First of all, the basis that you have, you indicated it was $750,000 was the basis on the stock that's in the portfolio. And so basically how that works is that stock is taxed at your federal marginal income tax rate, which is the higher rate of 39.6% based on your income. So there is certainly a tax liability there, but then the real benefit comes from the rest of the stock, which is the appreciation in the stock of, you told us, $1,750,000. So basically that figure there is taxed at your lower federal capital gains rate. So for the two of you, that's at 20%, but certainly that's half of what it would be taxed at if you took just a lump sum distribution. So basically, by doing the net unrealized appreciation option, you're saving about $343,000 in taxes. So that's a pretty significant savings. And then the other option you have with that is if you wanted to keep the Air Technologies Inc. stock, you could. So basically how it would work is if you did that, you would still pay taxes immediately on the basis, the $750,000, but then you would defer paying taxes on the remaining amount until you sold that. So if this would be a good strategy if you anticipate the value of the Air Technologies stock increasing, it might make sense to do so. And then any appreciation from when you did make the transition would be taxed at long-term or short-term capital gains, depending on whether you held the stock for greater than or less than a year following the initial distribution. So ultimately, that's a huge benefit there. The one key important thing with your 401k is at this point you've failed to or neglected to designate a beneficiary. So that's something that you absolutely want to do. Certainly, it helps avoid the probate process and everything like that. So I would recommend you name Martha as your primary beneficiary and your children, Carol and Scott, as the contingent beneficiaries. Next, I'd like to move on to Martha's 401k. So with Martha, you're an active participant in the Best Advertising Agency's 401k, which is great. And you indicated that you defer about 10% of your salary, which that's a good number, but you had ultimately identified a goal of wanting to increase your tax advantage savings. So what you should look to do is max out your 401k contribution. So this certainly will reduce current income that's available for everyday expenses, but it does meet the goal of increasing your tax advantage savings, which is something that's very important. And then Martha asked us to explain your options upon retirement. What I would suggest at your retirement that you do is you open a rollover IRA. Now this is different from George because yours isn't funded completely with employer stock, but ultimately with that, when you establish a rollover IRA, you can roll over the balance of your 401k into that IRA account and then create a diversified portfolio. And this is certainly something we can offer for you as well as part of our investment management services. And of course, before entering into any agreement there, we'd provide you all the disclosures, including ADV Part 2B, if it is a managed account where we manage the funds for you. And the other benefit of it being in an IRA is you have a broader investment selection typically than your existing 401k would offer. And then if your beneficiaries, if you do pass away, your beneficiaries would typically then open a beneficial IRA. Now it's slightly different whether it's George that is the primary beneficiary and is alive at the time, or if he predeceases you, then Carol and Scott, again, we would recommend as they would have the beneficial IRAs. And that certainly brings us to the other point. Just like George, Martha, you have neglected to name a beneficiary on the account. Similarly, or conversely to what we did for George, I would recommend you establish on your 401k, you name George as the primary beneficiary, and then Scott and Carol as the contingent beneficiaries, and we would likely do the same thing for a IRA for you as well. Next, I'd like to talk about your taxable investments. George and Martha, you've indicated that you have a high risk tolerance. And so while that's typically not something I see with clients that are, in their mid-60s, that's certainly something we can manage to. In evaluating your investments, both in your taxable account and then in your 401k, Martha, and also your bond portfolio, you're not invested as far as a high risk tolerance. Sort of more of a conservative or moderately conservative, because you do have about 50% that's into bonds, at least in a couple of your accounts. And so in the financial plan that I provided you, I've recommended some proposed changes in the portfolio and what a portfolio might look like that would be managed to that level of risk tolerance, and what changes we would make to your asset allocation. And so certainly, again, we do offer investment management services, and that's something we can discuss if you decide to. And again, all disclosures will be provided. And certainly one of the things we would want to do is have a discussion to ensure that you do possess a high risk tolerance. So it would be certainly part of the conversation as well. And then lastly, on undeveloped land, George, you inherited a tract of undeveloped land when your father passed away in 2011. Told us it has a value of in his estate of $270,000 and a fair market value currently of $500,000. You'd expressed concern that since it is located in another state, that could complicate the probate proceedings, and you did expect it to appreciate significantly in value over the next several years. So you of course wanted it to remain in the family. So ultimately, Scott has expressed an interest to purchase the property, but doesn't possess the financing available to do so at this time. And George, you mentioned that you were willing to help him with that, but you also want some assurances. You want to make sure you receive the proceeds while you're alive, and ultimately you also mentioned you wanted to be able to use the property as collateral, and then you wanted the payments to stop when you pass away. So the key feature to use or to take advantage of all of these is a self-canceling installment note. This is perfect. It meets all the needs that you specified, and it's unique in that it cancels at your death, and then any unpaid balance is effectively canceled. So the one thing with that is there's a premium that's usually paid, and that's either in the form of a slightly higher sale price or a slightly higher interest rate, and that's to make sure that it's an equal exchange of services, or equal exchange of property, and that's why there is that feature in there. So ultimately, that's what I'd like to discuss today. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And ultimately, I suggest we get together again in the next month or so to kind of talk about these and discuss where we need to go from here. Thanks so much.